Okay, welcome all to this session of Lean Agile Delivery and Coaching Network and Digital Transformation London. Today we have Dean Latchana, that is one of the frequent speakers, I would say. At least once per year, Dean, you have a session with us. So thank you for your collaboration in managing and creating knowledge for this community. This is the first event of May. Actually, we are going to have another event in 2 weeks. So if you want, you can register to that session because the registration are already open. Okay, nothing more to add, just a couple of references. We have a YouTube channel where you will be able to find the record of this session, and also you have plenty of sessions already there, because I think we are very, very close to 100 events recorded in English and in Italian with one of our connected communities. And another channel where we are present is LinkedIn, and we have a group on LinkedIn. So you are invited to join. I will put the link in the chat during the session, so you can follow the link for this too. And that's all actually from my side. Today we have Dean, Isaac. Today we have Dean, sorry, just to tell you, Zach is the speaker for the next event in May, at the end of May. Okay, so today's topic is about leadership, correct, Dean?
Absolutely, absolutely, and how they can help enable organizations to continuously transform.
Yeah, I love this meeting because I'm working in an organization in a continuous transformation, so I will listen to everything that you're going to tell, so be prepared to my questions. Just for us, Dean, it's okay for you to have a question during your presentation, or you prefer to have, okay, perfect. So yeah. If you are fine, okay. If you are fine, you can put your questions into the chat, and I will facilitate with Dean the connection. So I will ask you to unmute, and so you can make your question directly for the recording. In the meantime, while listening, I'm suggesting to stay on mute just to limit the noisy on the background. But again, if you make a question, feel free to unmute. There is no limitation, I mean, technical limitation on that. If you are able to keep your video on, it will be great, particularly during the question, because you know Zoom is managing the focus when talking, and so we will see your face also in the recording. So actually my time is over, I know. So the stage is yours, Dean. Thank you for sharing.
Thank you, Corrado. And thank you for the fantastic work you do in the community. I know you've done extraordinary work for everybody on these meetups and so forth. So we all value the sterling effort you put into this. This is really, really good stuff. And you know, we've kind of transition from pre-pandemic to pandemic to post-pandemic as well. So great work there. So I'm just going to share my screen. Bear with me. Okay, so you should be seeing the opening slide. Yeah, the leader's role in enabling organizational competitiveness. And I'm going to be talking about and discussing with you guys some conditions for continuous transformation and their critical role in enabling that. We're going to be about 1 hour, 15 minutes, just so you know. And let me just, first of all, just talk about myself a little bit. So I've been fortunate enough to work for a number of different organizations. I started off as a front-end developer back in 2001 at the BBC, and I soon moved into project management, Scrum Mastership, Agile Coach, a familiar journey for many of us. I think my recent years, my direction has been towards business agility. So enabling leaders, teams, individuals, change agents, fellow coaches to be able to sense and respond appropriately in a rapidly changing world. More recently, I've joined Tech Systems, which is a fairly large company focusing on recruitment, but I am, if I can show you the next slide, helping with a agile practice within EMEA, mostly in the UK, and we provide some good kind of end-to-end services for leaders, teams, and individuals on their transformation journey. But enough about me. Let's talk about tonight. And tonight is going to be a gathering of people with lots of different diverse knowledge and experience. And we want to be able to kind of create a safe environment where we can share our stories and challenge each other's thinking and kind of form some kind of set of kind of views about how we can support the leaders in our organizations, or perhaps leaders that we coach and support. So we want to be able to kind of share stories. So I'm going to share a few of my own stories, and hopefully it will generate some debate and discussion. I've done this talk a number of times now, and when I first did it, people kind of left saying, oh, this is all well and good, Dean, nice talk, but how about some tips? What can we do practically? So peppered throughout this talk, I've got some tips to share as well. Wherever you see this logo, there'll be a tip. Okay, so first thing I'd like to do is just refer to a quote which Jack Welch, credited to Jack Welch, who was the CEO of General Electric. He mentioned this about 25 years ago. He was able to revolutionize General Electric to be, at the time, the most capitalized organization in the world. He said that if the rate of change on the outside exceeds the rate of change on the inside, the end is near. If the rate of change on the outside exceeds the rate of change on the inside, the end is near. Any thoughts or any ideas that people have? How does this resonate with people? Feel free to unmute yourself and maybe just share some thoughts. Zach wants to share something.
Yeah, it's strategic drift is what he's talking about. So a company goes along and it's got some ups and downs, and then it goes into a period of flux. And then there will be a period where the management go, we either have to stop that and change into what's happening outside. And with that comes the whole strategic plethora of organizational design. What processes are we using? Do we have to copy what our competitors are doing? What's the benchmarks? And things at that level, people don't really care whether you're doing Agile, Kanban, or the latest thing off the shelf. So there's 3 levels in the organization, which is strategy, operations, and the guys doing the work actually. So I think it's nice and easier to be able to train people that are doing Agile and understand systems to appreciate the bigger systems up above.
Absolutely, yeah, thank you, Zach. Yeah, I subscribe to what you're saying there. Any other thoughts? Does this resonate with people?
Yeah, I kind of, when you mentioned that, for me, it was about, from a leadership perspective, the rate of change and the reality around them versus the rate of change of themselves in aligning to that reality. So things can change in the environment around the leader. And if the leader is not changing themselves with that new environment, they could be creating a perception that's just misaligned with what's really going on. So I kind of saw it from that angle when you explain that.
Yeah, absolutely, Manish. Yeah, thank you. Michael, you've just unmuted yourself. Do you want to share something?
Yes. I mean, basically what stood out to me was the fact that, like both Zach and Manish have touched upon, the issue is context. We talk about Porter's 5 forces, etc. And what we really need to be aware of is the fact that we don't exist in a vacuum. Any organization that we are part of has an overarching strategy and mission a goal that they're trying to achieve. However, the environment that they're operating in is itself changing on a sometimes hourly basis. So what we really need to be aware of is whether there is any disruption taking place outside that impacts materially our strategy or our goals or our way that we're approaching delivering on our intentions or OKRs. The other thing is the fact that I think while I take on board what Zach and Manesh have just pointed out, I believe this is more to do with the organization. The leader is a catalyst, but it only starts with them. If he cannot actually develop that organizational riptide of innovation, if he cannot actually spark change within the organization that is responsive to what's happening outside and is still cognizant of what the OKRs are, then the leader will fail, and by extension, the organization will be in trouble.
Absolutely. Thank you, Michael. So thank you, Zach, Manish, and Michael for kind of kicking off the discussion here. Really great stuff. And I subscribe to all of what you've been saying. And just picking up on your point, Michael, here, is I agree, it's kind of at the organizational level as well as at the leader level and the individual level. And quite often, the organization and the individual and the leader tends to build patterns or as pattern and trained on what was successful yesterday. But as the world becomes more different, changes faster, those ways of working may not be appropriate for today and certainly not tomorrow. But what we tend to do as humans, is very much human nature, we tend to become overly protective of perhaps the products or services that we're offering to the market, particular organizational structures. We tend to kind of become transfixed by the bright lights of incentives. Career paths as well. There are many individuals who have spent many years and tens of thousands of euros, pounds, or dollars on a particular career path. And how we lead as well, we become pattern and trained in that as well. So I subscribe to what you guys are saying. It kind of, we need to be conscious of what this statement says at an individual, team, business unit, and organizational level as well. I'd like to move on. So, Michael, you mentioned Porter's 5 forces. I'd like to bring on board something else, which is quite often used in business school, and that's pest analysis. So for those who are unfamiliar with pest analysis or need a reminder, it's a tool used to kind of gain a macro picture of the industrial environment an organization's in, and it allows organizations to form an impression of the factors which may impact them as a kind of going concern as a business. So let me unpack this a little bit. So PESTEL stands for kind of political, economic, social, technology, legal, and environmental. So there's great amount of change here. So in terms of political, we may be aware of geopolitical tensions which happen in the apparent movement to deglobalization, the rise of populism. We think about economics, we think about the rise of stagflation. So increasing inflation in many kind of economies, but like perhaps very, very little growth. Supply chain disruptions, global recession. Socially, we think about the ever-increasing inequality, regionalization, the pressure on our pocket in terms of us as customers, the kind of ever-present kind of ever-present COVID, and very evident in many countries. If you think about technology, the apparent kind of possibility of regulation of big tech, social media, and from a technology point of view, customers always kind of looking for the next best thing for convenience or value or novelty. And we think about legal. If we just think about some countries, you know, think about the UK, for example, you know, the likes of Brexit is going to kind of present many opportunities in terms of kind of what legal framework we want to adopt now that we're outside the EU. And then finally, environmental as well. Let's not forget, despite the geopolitical tensions of the last few months, we still have kind of carbon targets to meet, and we've got to think about kind of climate change and so forth. So we may not think it, but all these things are going to have an effect on the organizations we work in. And one thing I'd like to pick up on, first of all, is one different type of change that we can kind of describe as business model disruption. And to bring this to life a little bit, I'd like to tell you a story about a retailer in the UK. So this retailer is called Morrison's. And about a year ago, a little bit more than a year ago, they're experimenting with partnering with a disruptor in the kind of grocery, supermarket grocery segment. They were partnering with Deliveroo, and Morrison's was making their products available to Deliveroo for kind of rapid delivery within a few minutes to customers. Or what was really quite interesting is Morrison's was almost acting as a wholesale supplier, and Deliveroo was setting their own prices and making their own products available through what Morrison's can provide as a wholesaler. So that's quite a big business model disruption for Morrison's. So rather than sending stuff in e-commerce or through their supermarkets directly to customers, they're changing their business model. So let me just go back here. So it's quite an interesting shift, and there has to be some kind of appetite within the leadership team and other stakeholders in the organization to kind of explore this business model. Another type of business model disruption, which is going to be facing the motor industry, is the shift to away from internal combustion engine towards kind of more modern forms of propulsion, such as electric. And what's really interesting is currently a lot of these organizations, the likes of Ford and other motor manufacturers, are getting profit not through the sale of the car, but chiefly through financing and the selling of spare parts. But because electric vehicles are a lot simpler and a lot more reliable, they're going to be undercut by not being able to get as much profit or revenue through the sale of car parts. So that's another form of business model disruption. So what I'd like to do is invite you guys to consider what business model disruptions or any kind of disruptions you may be seeing in your organization, the organizations you're serving, or maybe just generally in the business sector. And to do that, what I'll invite you guys to do is go to menti.com, either on your laptops or phones, and type in this code 36036682. So if I can please invite you to do that. What you're going to be presented with is, if I launch it, I think it's launched already, you should be seeing a question, what disruptions are you observing? And you can see 3 fields there. So I just invite you just to pause and reflect and just add in, it could be 1, it could be 2, it could be 3 different types of disruptions you're seeing. Corrado, maybe you could just validate that people should be seeing that, that first question with 3 fields.
Yeah, I also put in the chat the direct link to the Menti page. So simply click on the link in the chat if you need it.
Thank you. And so, yeah, once you get there, just fill in those fields. And what I'm going to do, I'm going to switch my screen share to a word cloud, which is being populated live. Here we go. Yeah, some great contributions here. Port congestion, paradigm shift, automation, decarbonisation. Okay, let's spend another moment just responding to that question. Okay, who put port congestion? Maybe they can explain that one, if that's okay.
Do you hear me?
Yeah,
Yeah,
Holger.
we can hear you. Hello, hello.
I'm working in the shipping industry and look at, for example, what happens in Los Angeles or in Shanghai now with port congestion, that the ships don't go and disrupt the supply chains. And also the situation in Shanghai, for example, with the COVID, that also blocks the supply chain and has a very big effect on the, well, and on world trade.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And what are the kind of consequences of that disruption and effect on world trade? Are you experiencing any of that with your own particular company or perhaps clients that you're supporting?
Well, what we experience now is, for example, that we have massive profits because everybody needs some containers and so on. So that's the positive for the company. But I think we'll have some effect also on the transportation, that maybe trade will be less and some more localized production. That one rethinks the way how trade is going on. So that's what goes in my mind.
That's really interesting. Yeah, that kind of adds to the pendulum swinging back to reshoring or nearshoring and perhaps challenging globalization. Yeah, very interesting. Thank you for sharing. Let's pick out another one. I'm not sure if it's New BAU or New BAU. Who wrote that one?
Please unmute, Zach.
Yeah, that was me. So Neubau is the new business as usual, BAU, and it's based around the Vorkers learning system, which was put forward by the Bauhaus. So they started 100 years ago where it was worse than it is today. End of the First World War, Spanish flu killed more people than COVID, and the threat of mass production was coming in, where today we see automation coming in. So it affects how people work. And basically what it's saying is that the things that started off as architecture moved up into design and became a key way of influence around the world, the experiences that we have. The print that is on the page here at Menti is inspired by Bauhaus because it is sans print. Some of the furniture is absolutely wonderful to look at, but I don't think I'd want it in my house. So what we're saying is that to move from as is agile, we have to come through ways of thinking which incorporate the Bauhaus way of thinking, and then go into pulling inspiration from movie making and music making. Because the coders that I'm speaking to today, the guys actually doing the work, they're going, it's UCD, mate. So we write a script, we then have a screenplay, and the technology is like the soundtrack to a movie. So there's a change there that's coming through. It takes, and what you were saying with Stepple, you can have your business cut into between 7 and 12 different layers. And there's a Beaufort scale, which goes 1 to 12 inside the business. And then above it, there's the trade winds, which go above Stepple. And above that is the jet stream, which is affecting the things that we're just not going to see. So we're ready to roll. Sorry, I waffled a bit.
Absolutely. You'll give me something to Google and read up after this call. So thank you, Zach. Thank you, Zach.
I found the illumination.
Let's go ahead.
Tune in for the next meeting. I'll explain it all there.
Yeah, I'll definitely come along to that one. Okay, just conscious of time. Yeah, cheers, Zach. Let's move on. So I'm going to switch my screen share back to the deck. Bear with me. Here we go. Okay, so let's move on. So just picking up the thread on the main purpose of this talk, we've spoken about like the seismic changes which are happening globally, locally, regionally, and also to our own organizations. But let's think about what are the conditions that we need to create or allow others to create for this continuous transformation to a world which is always rapidly changing. What are the prerequisites for organizational competitiveness in a fast changing world? So I'm going to present 4 here and unpack 4 of them. And it's based around supporting leaders to foster exploration and emergence. And the first of which is leaders supporting individuals to test assumptions. Secondly, is leaders acting as ground conductors. Thirdly, leaders creating a safe to learn environment. And lastly, leaders forming and protecting an adaptive space to allow innovators to explore, find some early success, but then those innovators need to have the environment where they can actually scale their innovations. And that's where they need to rely on the operators. Innovators and operators don't tend to see eye to eye. So some really interesting thinking from an academic, which I'd like to share with you guys, and that's in that area. But first of all, let's think about leaders supporting individuals to test assumptions. So I'd like to bring on board some work from, well, first of all, let's just unpack a particular mindset that many of us have, and quite often leaders have as well. And that's one where we believe we can respond in an ordered fashion. And this is kind of akin to a fixed mindset. So sometimes we metabolize change and uncertainty as a threat. And how we respond is sometimes with false certainty. And sometimes when there's a great deal of change, we tend to rely on past experience, and that can give us comfort, but that comfort is misplaced. And quite often we, and also leaders too, try to shape and control, almost take a predict and control mindset and formulate some kind of deterministic outcome with predefined steps. So this is very much an ordered response to how changes exist and how we might want to kind of instill change within our teams and organizations. Let's contrast this to a different approach, an adaptive response to change. And this could be similar to like a growth mindset. This is where a leader understands they don't know everything. They're not a see-all or know-all leader anymore, and perhaps they never were in months and years gone by. And their response is, okay, let's see what we can do. So it's a more kind of diverse, more open canvassing of different opinions. So ask questions, scan the world for differences, seek diverse voices. And then perhaps a third characteristic of an adaptive response is a new approach to enable others. So creating the conditions for emergence and experimentation. So to do that, to unpack that a little bit more, I'd like us to go to Menti again. I'm just going to queue up the next question. Bear with me. And you might get a little pop-up at the top of your laptop or the top of your mobile, inviting you to go to the next question. So I'd like to ask you guys, is your organization, does it tend to be ordered or does it tend to be adaptive? So I'm going to just go back to the previous slide just to give you a reminder of the characteristics of ordered and adaptiveness. And then I'm going to do a screen share of how the results are coming through on Menti. Okay, 8 responses so far. switch the screen share to the Menti, but stand by. So Menti's drawn this pretty little graph for us. It's showing the average as well as the distribution of our responses. So it's definitely weighted to the left-hand side. So an ordered approach that our organizations have, and perhaps could be true for the characteristic of our leaders. So that's 10 responses. I think that's probably the majority of us. What do people take from this? Feel free to unmute yourself and share what thoughts come to mind.
Oh, you go first.
No, you go. It's fine.
Oh, let's have the politeness contest right here.
Yeah.
All right, let me be the unpolite person then. I think it's quite natural, right? It's quite you need quite a hungry mind for change, to not resort to what we have learned in the past, right? To not trying to control it. And many of, the organization that I work for at the moment is big, established. So leaders or people in leadership positions tend to be successful because they have been doing what they've been doing the last 30 years or so, right? And then even if you have the cognitive realization that maybe there is a better way, it is quite challenging to retrain that, right? If you go and take the martial art example, where we train to subdue our reflexes, right? Because our reflexes, if you apply martial art, everything's wrong. Right? You tense up, you be defensive, you get emotional. And in martial arts, you spend a lot of time to retrain those reflexes, to not tense up, to not get emotional. And I think it's the same thing. What I read from that Menti is that, we have a journey, we're on a journey. And if Agile wants to be successful, that is probably where we have to go, right?
Yep.
Thanks, Sven.
Sorry, that was a long way. Very unpolite. My apologies. You go now.
No problem. Michael, did you want to share something?
Well, yes, it was literally just the fact that, as everyone has immediately noted, organizations tend to have developed a culture, and the culture is built on standardized processes and responses to situations. Now, as we've all acknowledged, the problem happens when you are faced with something that is novel, something that is unexpected. And when that happens, the question is this: are you actually practicing a more shuhari way of dealing with situations, or a Kneffin-like way of dealing with situations, where you've practiced some certain basics, you know how to keep the wolf away from the door, but you also know how to mix and match those responses to deal with unexpected situations? Or do you literally go into a mental freeze and start trying to force the context to fit your mindset? I think that is really where the agile stroke lean approach comes up against the organizational inertia. They are literally used to applying certain procedures to, shall we say, enforce order into situations. And the problem is with that, you will only get what was planned for at the beginning. What you will not get is an ability to leverage unique circumstances and actually access value that could be hidden within those apparently chaotic situations. But that is simply because the fact that in any disruption, all the blocks are moving around. What you really need to do is keep your eyes on the ones that hold value for you, and then see how you're going to utilize them, rather than try and force them back into the order you're expecting.
Yeah. Thank you, Michael. Conscious of time, Manish, I know you unmuted yourself. Do you have something to share?
Oh yeah, I think when I look at the graph, it kind of tells me that there's more value in stability and predictability over opportunity and innovation.
Yeah, that's a nice takeaway. Thank you. Conscious of the time, I'm going to move on now and reshare the deck. What I'd like to do now is share the first tip, and this tip may not be new to many of us on the call. And it's a tip which can be formulated as illustrated here. This is from Barry O'Reilly, who's pretty hot in this field here, and has taken a hypothesis-driven development approach to change. And let me just bring this to life a little bit by bringing in a fictitious example of how this hypothesis development statement can work. And let's suppose we're thinking about an opportunity at McDonald's, where within restaurants, they have these EPOS terminals, so these electronic point of sale terminals, where customers could go up, place an order and make a payment. And let's suppose this organization wants to make a trial for cryptocurrency purchases within a particular part of the world, so in North America. What they might want to do is recognize the problem or opportunity. So due to the substitution threat of some customers choosing some crypto payment, so there could be an emergent substitution threat to how customers normally pay in standard currencies. We believe offering payment in crypto at our EPOS terminals in the US and Canada will result in early adoption with young adults. So you can see we are limiting the size of the experiment to a geography, to a particular age group, and for a particular channel of purchase, the EPOS channel of purchase. We are confident to proceed. This is the experiment. This is a hypothesis the organization has, so that after a few months, they want to be able to see whether experiments in a small number of stores is working. So we're confident to proceed when financial transactions is complete within some period of time. So there's no delay to transactions. There's a repeat usage for the top 2 cryptocurrencies. The number of transactions is of some kind of percentage, showing there's early signs that this could be a good thing to continue investing in and developing for a particular age group. And any increase in net promoter score can be attributed to that particular age group. And I think I have a 5th one as well. So any fluctuations in these cryptocurrencies not having a huge detrimental impact to revenue. So what we're doing here, we're building in some limited liabilities to ensure that if there's any externalities, we're aware of them and we're limiting our exposure. So what's really important here is by limiting our exposure, both in terms of the geography, the point of sale, the age group, the duration, and any kind of financial exposure, we are actually bringing in those who may be skeptical into the design of this experiment. And that's a really powerful thing that we can do. So we design experiments with those skeptics, not despite them. So I'm just going to pause there to see if anyone's got any experience with this kind of way of having a more adaptive sense respond way of working rather than predict or control way of working. Corrado, you got your hand up.
Yeah, actually, we are adopting a very similar framework for all the changes that we want to apply to the business unit behavior. So we asked in our role to prepare an hypothesis statement, and that comprehends also how to measure success or not. And this is revealing as a very good exercise for the leaders, the business leaders, because they must actually think not only about the actions where they spend most of the time, but also on the way to measure the feedback loop. And so this has as a consequence that they really need to focus on what is valuable for the customers. I mean, pretty good exercise, I have to say.
That's great. It's good to see this has been used in anger. And then let me just have this one here because I'm conscious of time. So the second area that we might want to explore in terms of enabling leaders to kind of foster the exploration and emergence is them create an environment where they act as grand conductors. So to do this, I'd like to bring on board some work from David Marquet, who wrote the fantastic book, Turn the Ship Around. And he describes many organizations as, put crudely, almost like a pyramid structure where we have the teams and individuals at the bottom of the organization. They happen to be closest to the customer. So they understand the wants, needs, and desires of the customer and where problems may be. What tends to happen is information is passed up through all the ranks, all the middle managers to the apex of the organization, where there are some leaders who, in the absence of what the customers truly want, make some kind of decision, and that decision gets passed back down to the teams and individuals to execute. Let's suppose that takes 6 weeks for that lead time to actually occur. In a fast changing world, that's not really going to cut it. We're not going to have a successful organization if we want to outlearn and outcompete against the competition. So rather than push information up to authority, what David Marquet talks about is looking for opportunities where we can push authority down to where the information is. So I'm just going to unpack that a little bit more, but I'm just going to ask another Menti question. So this is one where we want to see whether, in your experience, is information being pushed up to authority for a decision to happen, or is authority in the right degrees and in the right manner being pushed down to where the information is, so the teams and individuals, for them to make their own decision? So if I could invite you back to Menti, and I'm going to queue up the next question. So again, you might get a prompt at the top of your mobile phone or the top of your laptop, inviting you to the third question. And if I could invite you to respond to that, please. Okay. So the distribution is certainly towards the left. There does seem to be a fair number in the middle, but it's looking at the kind of average, it's certainly towards the left. So that's interesting. In our experience in the organizations that we're in or supporting, that there tends to be information pushed to authority. Okay, so let's think about what David Marquet would say in these situations. So I'm just switch the screen share back again. So it's fairly risky just to give teams and individuals at the bottom of the organization a great amount of control immediately. It needs to be under certain conditions, and these conditions need to evolve incrementally. So what David Marquet talks about is ensuring that individuals and teams have a competency of what the mission is, of what we're trying to achieve in a given sprint or a particular quarter, or what the strategic intent is for the organization or the particular business unit. That's all around the clarity of what individuals and teams are trying to do. We also need to ensure they have the right technical competency to be able to do good work. And the more we have individuals and teams with a great deal of competency and clarity, the more we should be able to afford them to make the right kind of decisions, have them allow them to have more control. So that kind of green kind of oval there is like tends to be the sweet spot, and we want to try and move incrementally up towards the top right hand corner, so teams and individuals can make more and more decisions, so authority can be pushed down to where that information exists. And in order to do that, David Marquet talks about a particular approach. This is called the ladder of leadership. So what he says interesting is give control first. So the first step is to actually move up, so individuals and teams can actually demonstrate a degree of their own clarity and competency, and the leaders are there to support them, or perhaps the leaders partnering up with a coach. And in order to do that, there's a dialogue which can happen between what's termed here a boss, but we can call this perhaps a leader. Boss is actually quite an old-fashioned word. and the worker. Again, the worker who might want to replace that with the phrase team member. So let's suppose the team member, first of all, is accustomed to asking the leader, tell me what to do. The leader should respond with position 2 on their side, saying, tell me what to think. And this allows that individual to pause and reflect and say, okay, in this situation, here's what I think we should do. And this could be a conversation which happens over a number of days or weeks. Let's suppose now the individual feels comfortable to actually share with the leader, this is what I think. The leader would actually respond by going up to position 3, saying, what do you recommend? And what we really need to do is get to a level where there's a really strong relationship evolving, where the leader and the teammate can actually get to a place which David Marquet calls intent-based leadership. The individual, the team member, has competency of the mission, competency of being able to execute the mission and have the clarity of what that mission is. And they've incrementally got to a place of more control in a place where it's safe and contextual and appropriate. I'm just going to pause there to see if anyone's got any builds on this, or perhaps any experiences on it. Corrado, thank you for the love heart there. Any thoughts, guys, on this?
Certainly, Dean. You're almost there. One more iteration and you'll be right on it. In the army, they have 2 planning techniques. One is staff planning, where everything happens in the central place. You also have a combat planning manual, which is like the teams on the ground. They plan forward, they plan backward, they plan 1 up, 2 up. So that means that people can plan the work they've got to do, plan backwards so you can get your contingency in place, tell your immediate boss, and tell your bigger boss. And the way that I've been doing that over the last 5 years is using a technique called lean scenes. It takes the concept of a user story, but instead of focusing on an external user, you bring it into the business and you write the lean scene to have 3 main characters in it: the team, operations, and strategy. And what that allows you to do is to have the conversations with the different people. So as a coach, part of my job is to coach the managers to be responsive to the ideas coming in. Because what I see from the last year of working for 3 different government departments is that it's pretty much like the M25 going around London. So you start just by the Dartford Tunnel and you've got to go all the way around. And there's 4 service stations, as you know. So that's the Discovery, the Alpha, the Beta, and the Live. But the way the government works is, instead of going round the motorway, you've got to come off at each junction and come into the centre of town to get the information and then go back out again. And we all know that in the centre of London, it's an emission-free zone. So there's no information coming out of it. So yeah, so the main thing that I say is get the concept of lean scenes and give people time. On the 6 weeks, you're almost there. It takes 6 weeks for people to change a habit and 2 weeks to see the results. First time you go through it, it takes about 13 weeks. There's a fantastic book, The Artist's Way by Julia Cameron. So it's not from business, but it's the way that I see business going, where we'll be taking more from the arts to be able to give our customers better experiences. And going back to the previous question, if our staff are only getting 2.1 out of 5 for the experience of being in that organization, the customer is going to get a lot less, and the customer is going to go with people that can give them a better experience. So we as leaders have to give our staff of the different generations the experiences that they need to build their career in a safe way. And I use a technique called climate to do it, which I'll show next week or in 2 weeks' time.
Good stuff, Zach. Was that lean sayings?
Lean scenes. So think of it like acting. So instead of having a story, which is some abstract thing, you bring the scene in. It's one of my inventions.
Okay, good stuff. Yeah, thanks, Corrado. Lean scenes. Okay, thanks, Corrado, for adding that to the chat. Let's move on. We've got about little less than half an hour left, so let's crack on. So the third one. So leaders creating a safe to learn environment. So this is something from Wardley Map and Simon Wardley, and I quite like this. Because it's kind of showing a spectrum of where organisations can focus on, and there tends to be some kind of bias to one end or the other end, rightly or wrongly, in the organisation's market. So what tends to happen is there's a degree of experimentation at the beginning of an organisation's existence. They're rapidly innovating, they're rapidly exploring, experimenting, and they happen to land by chance or through good experimentation some products or services which is right for the market at that time, and maybe for a few months or a few years into the future. What organizations tend to do is then automate that so it's a bit more repeatable, and they begin to optimize that. So they begin to do things like operational excellence. They can squeeze more and more revenue out of ever thinner margins, and that becomes a stable market offering. So we move from opportunities into industrialization, from experimentation into continuous improvement. And that's a continuous spectrum that organizations tend to do, typically from left to right. Okay, I'm going to ask you guys a question in a moment, using an example I gave at the top of this talk. So remember, we spoke about Deliveroo. Deliveroo is an organization which allows people to install their app and make purchases for takeaways or other items at convenience, which arrives at customers' doorsteps within a few number of minutes. It was founded in 2013. Using this spectrum, where do you think Deliveroo was in 2013, and where do we think it is now?
Sorry, is this an open question?
It's an open question. It's an open question.
I think when they started, they were in the innovate phase. And I'd say that at the moment, they are between automate and optimize. Why I say that is because while they internally might have even moved into the stabilization phase, the partners they're working with will be innovating to see whether or not they can adapt them to their own business model. So I think Deliveroo will be optimizing their interactions with those outside partners, even though within their own organization, they probably have most things automated and are looking to stabilize.
Yeah, thank you, Michael. And Parimala on chat is thinking optimize as well. Okay, let's bring in the next organization in the case studies, Morrison's, founded in 1899. Where do we think Morrison's was in 1899, and where do we think they tend to be now? Open question to Michael or anybody else on the call.
Morrison's are moving back towards innovate. I've got friends that make and sell ice cream with alcohol in it, and Morrison's is the only supermarket that's taken them up. So Morrison's at a state now where they're trying to diversify their portfolio with smaller companies, which will give them that impetus into their larger state organization, is my view. So they are stable and they can afford to take a punt on 5 different products, and one will succeed using portfolio theory.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so I think what you just shared there, Zach, is the story that I would say as well about Morrison's, is they are highly stabilized. They've got a way of working, a market offering, which is fairly static, but they're also trying to innovate at the same time. In this case studies where they're partnering Deliveroo to change how they bring something to market, where they are the wholesalers rather than delivering products to the end customer, is an example where they are innovating in partnership with other organizations. Okay, let's move on. Just pause there for a moment. It's worth thinking about our own organization, our own teams. What is a balance? Does that balance feel right to us in the world which is rapidly changing? And it's a question that we can pose to our leaders. Let's move on anyway. Let's skip over that one. Leaders creating a safe to learn environment. So I'd like to bring on board the work of Ron Westrom. Did some work in the last couple of decades or so around organizational culture. And what he found is generative cultures create the conditions for exploration and novelty. And a generative culture is the one kind of with characteristics on the right-hand side. But we also have, Zach, I'm not going to ask you about the government organizations that you've worked with, where they might be on this topology. I can guess. I think we can all guess. but we have pathological organizations, and we also have bureaucratic organizations. So the pathological ones tend to be very much power orientated. There's low cooperation within the department or agency, or even across departments. If there's a message which needs to be shared, the message is shot, whereas the bureaucratic organization, the message tends to be kind of tolerated. When a generative organization, the message tends to be trained, their support to say, thank you for bringing this news to us, even though it might be negative news, or we need to throw the plan out over our shoulder and do something new. What I also like about this as well is that thinking about bridging between different departments, we're going to bring on board in a moment, the bridge which needs to happen between innovators and operators. So bridging tends to be discouraged in pathological organizations, tolerated in bureaucratic ones, and encouraged in generative organizations. To bring this to life a little bit more, just want to share a story about NASA. So NASA, back, I want to say around the early 60s when it was formed, or perhaps it was the late 50s. I think it was very much formed as a response to Sputnik, but let's suppose around that time. They were a highly successful organization. Let's not forget they were able to put a man on the moon by the end of the 60s. In terms of where they were placed at the time on this cultural topology map, they were highly generative. Managers and engineers spoke on a daily basis with their counterparts in different fields. And they built themselves on that success. They optimized, they became stable, and they became more and more siloed to the extent where information was not passed between departments. And that actually led to some quite catastrophic failures in the 80s and years into the future. So we think about the Challenger disaster, which we may know of, in 1986. The Challenger disaster happened because of the booster rockets, which helped kind of launch the shuttle into orbit. And there was a failure on an O-ring, which is a sealant which goes around the booster rockets. And the engineers, the company, the supplier, which was manufactured and was in charge of, you know, making sure these were well maintained, were telling NASA that we've got to be careful here. Do not launch in this morning, because it's a particularly cold morning, and we haven't got the confidence that we can launch because we feel that the sealant's going to not going to hold its integrity, and the booster's going to rock and fail, leading to the disaster of the shuttle. And that's actually what happened. But the leadership team with the NASA, under a great deal of political pressure to actually launch this the shuttle in this period of time. So this is an example of poor communication, the messenger being neglected, leading to a disaster, and NASA shifting from a generative, perhaps, to bureaucratic organization. And I just want to read a quote from Barry O'Reilly in his book, Unlearn, because I think this brings this to life really well. So NASA was having tremendous success with its manned space program. The organization was while it's doing that, was sowing the seeds for failure, creating false intellectual superiority and impenetrable towers of information. In time, those towers turned into silos, and it stopped information from flowing across the organization. This became a very real problem for NASA and led directly to catastrophic failure, resulting in loss of life. So, you know, this is a big contributor to the Challenger disaster and the Columbia disaster as well in 2003. So I'm just going to pause there and invite anyone to unmute to share their thinking on this, or whether they've kind of experienced something similar elsewhere.
Yeah, if nobody else wants to talk, does anybody else want to come in? I see this quite a lot. I have a technique similar to the models that you're showing there. It's Joran Ekval's creative climate measurement, which is 10 simple questions that any team can answer. And what you tend to find is that there's one team that creates the bottleneck within a squad of perhaps 20 teams. And it's going in and finding what's not right in the one team, and then helping them change their way of working so that the rest of the team invite them back into the fold. So it's usually people just not getting along with each other. The other thing that NASA did, which helped them screw things up, was that they fired everybody over 50. And then they had to rehire them again. So there was a lot there. And if you look at knowledge management, NASA does come up a lot in those stories. So the other thing is they had no competition at the time. So if we look at the way that Bezos and Musk and Branson are trying to commercialize space, it'll be interesting to compare their successes and failures against what NASA had. Sorry, I'll shut up now.
Thanks, Zach. Manish.
And so what I tend to see is the silos tend to get created when the definitions of success are diverging, and until there's some alignment on what success means, it's very difficult to overcome those silos, because they've almost created their own. They've almost created their own companies within the larger company, and that's what I tend to observe. They're shooting in different directions.
Yeah, there's a poor alignment, or there's no common understanding of the strategic intent. Thank you, Manish. Corrado.
Yeah, a quick observation from me is that a company is getting more and more siloed when they start focusing on the internal process instead of what they want to achieve.
Love that.
That's all.
Yeah. What I find is that at the beginning, the why and the how are very closely aligned. But then over time, we focus on the how, and the why kind of gets forgotten about, and there's more and more distance between the two. And it tends to require a shock event competitively or otherwise for those two things to crash together again. But, you know, never waste a crisis, as sometimes said. So we need to capitalize on those moments to allow the why and the how to come back together again. Let's move on. I'd like to share one more tip that I've experienced and had success with a particular client I have in mind. Remember, we're talking about creating leaders creating a safe to learn environment. And one way of doing that is creating not controlling or constrictive governance, but creating an environment where governance is enabling to allow that experimentation and emergence. And what I've got here is quite a busy slide, so I'm going to briefly kind of go over it, is that we may have, as long as we have our, what David Carme says, remember, around competency and clarity. If that's true, we can invite teams and individuals to be able to backlog ideas, and these could be treated as hypotheses, maybe written in a statement that we saw a few moments ago, which is tied to the strategic intent. And then we may bring into play in a particular quarter or some period of time something that we want to build and bring to market in a small percentage of the market, maybe using A/B testing. And we're searching here for a problem solution fit. We believe the customer has some kind of unmet want, need, or desire. So we bring that to the market. And if the team has clarity and competency, there's a light amount of governance there. We may want to inform the CFO, or if we're in a business unit, whoever's representing from a finance point of view. Of the few which are successful, we may allow those to graduate to the next stage. Maybe it's 1 in 5, maybe it's 1 in 20. Here we want to nail it. Here we believe there's something appropriate to the customer. Here we want to see how far it can scale. So we're looking for a product market fit, perhaps using language such as crossing the chasm if we're thinking about the adoption curve. Here the governance is slightly tighter. Here we may have some kind of cap on capital expenditure, and we may need to get approval on operational expenditure as well. And you can see where this is going. We're giving teams the freedom within some kind of constraints to be able to explore and incrementally go back to some kind of quarterly prioritization meeting to get a yay or nay, whether we persevere, pivot, or pull the plug on some kind of initiative if it's not fit for purpose, if the market's not responding in the right way. I'm conscious of time, so I'm going to move on. I'm sure we can talk a lot more about this tip, but let me move on to the fourth one and final one. So this is leaders forming and protecting an adaptive space for innovators and operators. So here I want to bring on board the work of an academic, Mary Albeen. She recognizes that in organizations which have an ordered response to change, there is tension between the innovators or the entrepreneurs and the operators, those who are kind of keeping alive the existing products and services. What tends to happen is that the operational system stifles the emergence of the entrepreneurial system. The operators have certain incentives of kind of operational excellence, being able to squeeze more and more margin out of ever kind of thinner opportunities. Maybe they've got certain incentives or ways of working which aren't, or governance processes which are totally incompatible with those who are innovators or entrepreneurs. But what we really need to do is create an environment where the entrepreneurial system actually enables the operational system to adapt to change. So how can we do that? So what Mary Albeen talks about is creating what she describes as an adaptive space where a viable future can occur. So this is where innovators and the operators can come together. And to do that, I'd like to share a real life example of something I was involved with for a grocery retailer client. And this, in hindsight, I now realized we were employing something called limited liability. So let me tell you about the experiment. This is probably about 4 years ago, and the innovators wanted to allow customers to make purchases using their iPhone by simply scanning the barcodes of products, purchasing it using Apple Pay, and put the products in the bag and just simply walking out the store. That was going to solve so many problems for managers within the store and customers not having to queue up and having the convenience and novelty of just making a purchase using their phones. Naturally, you'd expect there was some skepticism. Some stakeholders were afraid of shrink, which is a technical kind of jargon for kind of theft. So we wanted to design this experiment for a small amount of time for only a particular range of products. So this is only meal deals, so low value products in a small number of stores, and give the team only a certain amount of budget. And we chose store managers who were open to this experiment as well. So here we're employing limited liability. So the range of products, the time, the number of stores, the store manager, and how long the experimenters could go with this. We actually found success in the early days, but we couldn't scale this experiment. We needed to bring on board more and more of those individuals on the operational side. But through success of those early operators who we found success with, they tell stories. They tell stories of other store managers with other stakeholders, and through social proof, more and more individuals actually invited themselves into this experiment. So with the skeptics, we're designing this experiment with them, not despite them. And through success, it may be only 1 in 10 or 1 in 20, this gravitated across the organization. And now this is in every single convenience store of this particular supermarket. So this has created an adaptive space where those innovators and operators can actually share stories and build success to know whether they should persevere, pivot, or pull the plug on a certain experiment or initiative. Just going to pause there to see if there's any questions or any examples that others may have of bringing innovators and operators together.
Yeah, I find that I did a startup during lockdown, and the main client doubled their bid winning with it. So they've now come in and said, we want to invest. And we've got friends that want to invest as well. So that's one area where it was nice to get it up, get it out, charge a little money. And I felt like quite the artist doing that. And now you can see the operational thing starting to squeeze in. It's like, we've got to think of the money first before we do the next bit of development. And it's like, well, somebody's going to have to write it anyway, mate. So we might as well just get on and do it. And I sometimes take that attitude into companies. And when I'm working for a large organization, I'll allow myself 15 minutes every 2 hours to do a flow rack activity, which is something that can bring an idea up to speed over 6 to 8 weeks. It also means that you're not cutting the budget and you're not affecting the velocity of the work you're being paid to do.
Nice, thank you, Zach. Corrado.
Just a question more than an observation. Can we see some similarities between the open mindset and the closed mindset between innovators and operators?
I'll be cautious of using an open and closed mindset to describe one or the other, because it might come across a bit rude. But what I would say is that operators tend to have success being able to optimize and repeat and be able to get more and more out of existing products and services. Whereas the innovators are mavericks. They try and hack the system and to see what innovations and what might emerge. But I'll be cautious to kind of subscribe growth or fixed mindset on one or the other.
I've seen operators really become innovators, and all they were doing was waiting for permission, and they were waiting for space. You know, I don't think it's like a fixed type personality. There's a lot of operators that can innovate. They just don't. Tend not to be in the environment that allows that.
Yeah, I agree with Anesh. There's the fixed mindset doesn't work. Anybody can change their mindset using modes. So the three that we normally use are intuitive, social, and rational. And it's the intuitive social one that we were alluding to earlier. There's plenty of other ones that we can bring in, and it depends on the context that you put the person, or if you create a safe space, that person will change mode and bring new ideas forward and encourage others to do it, I find. Thanks, Manesh.
Okay, we've got 3 minutes left, so I'd like to draw to a close. We're going to skip over this Menti. I'm going to skip over this as well because we are short of time. Maybe I'll just touch on this as well. What Merit Albin also talks about is that we successful leaders look for individuals who have are able to bridge two different parts of the organization, two different business units, or two different, say, innovators and operators, because it's quite human for us to kind of consolidate around a small group of people. But it's also moving from, this is really what HR should be doing, rather than kind of thinking about human capital, thinking about social capital, and kind of fostering and bringing networks together between different organizations, allow that bridging to occur. Because organizations, if they can't restructure, they've got to be able to communicate how they structure across those different silos and business units. Let me move on. So we started off by thinking about Jack Welch, and he said that if the rate of change of the outside exceeds the rate of change of the inside, the end is near. We unpacked that a little bit. What I also did was bring on board 4 things that I've experienced, which allows leaders to experiment and look for emergence within their organizations to respond to the rapidly changing world. We spoke about how leaders can support individuals to test assumptions, how they can act as ground conductors, how they can create a safe to learn environment. And lastly, we spoke about how we need to protect the innovators, but then how we can actually create that adaptive space where innovators can work alongside operators to scale the right things into the market. And with that, I'd like to say thank you for Corrado for putting us together, and thank you for everyone who came along to this and contributed. Great discussion, and I'm looking forward to playing back the recording in the next few days.
Thank you, Dean.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Dean, for sharing, and thank you, everyone, for making this more interesting with your observation and your experience.
Very enjoyable.
Cool.
Good.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Cheers.
Thanks so much.
Bye now.
Bye all.
Good night.
Good night.